Anything that is human is mentionable. Anything that is mentionable can become more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone.
What are you getting after? What seeds are you planting? What are you overcoming? Think big. Think even bigger. Take some risks. God's got your back. Go for it. Don't hold back. Don't ever have regrets in your life. Go fail. Go grow from those things. Live your life.
Your identity is not defined by your successes or your failures.
If you're not happy where you're at, you won't be happy where you're going. Choose to do the things that will make you the person you want to be, that will make you a better person next week and next year.
You're going to have to leave some things you're actually good at behind so that you can find what you're wired for, what you're born for.
Being a world-class entrepreneur is being in every area of life excellent.
It is the little things that are so easy not to do.
The best thing that you can do is assume the best in people.
I want people around the world to believe they can do something great with their life.
If I build the biggest business, but I destroy my physical body and I lose my health, I don't think that's success. While you're on the journey climbing to success, never forget the things that matter most.
All right, we'll jump right into it. Welcome back to another inspiring episode of the Heart Healthy Hustle Show. Today we are joined by Dr. Ben Hardy, and I'm going to read to you a bit about who he is. Dr. Benjamin Hardy is an organizational psychologist and best-selling author of Willpower Doesn't Work. His blogs have been read over 100 million people and are featured on Forbes, Fortune, CNBC, Cheddar, Big Think, and many others. He is a regular contributor to Inc. and Psychology Today, and from 2015 to 2018, he was the #1 writer in the world on Medium.com. The #1 writer. He and his wife Lauren adopted 3 children through the foster system in February 2018, and 1 month later, Lauren became pregnant with twins who were born in December of 2018. In June, there's a book that he is launching, a new book called Personality Isn't Permanent. And this is where I am interested to dive into today. That book debunks the pervasive myths of personality that have captured pop culture. And I'm reading this from, I don't know if you wrote this or your publicist, but it says, for example, personality tests like Myers-Briggs and Enneagram are not only psychologically destructive, but are no more scientific than horoscopes. And this is coming from, I'm reading this like, man, I can't wait to talk because the Enneagram changed my life. Personality Isn't Permanent provides science-based strategies for reframing past memories, becoming the scribe of your identity narrative, upgrading your subconscious, and redesigning your environment. So I'm excited. We can kind of jump into a bit about the psychology behind personality and get to know a bit more about you first. So Ben, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, man, really cool to be with you and interested to hear how that test changed your life and just in general to see where this conversation goes.
Go ahead and share with the audience a little bit about a day-to-day, just kind of giving people a glimpse. So you're dealing with 5 children right now, is that correct?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, my wife's pregnant with a 6th, which will probably be our last for sure, man. I mean, that's
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Can I, if you don't mind me asking, I know fostering is something that's, there's nothing I can appreciate or respect more, pretty much, and I would like to know, hearing from you guys who have done this in a big way, what kind of sparked that for you to do that?
I will admit it was not my goal, my intention. It was my wife's. She grew up with what would be called therapeutic teenage foster girls throughout her home. They were short term. So when my wife was a young kid, they had probably 30 to 40 short term teenage high needs girls come through, probably stuck around for like 2 months at a time. And they had like 30 or 40 over a few years. And so like that had an impact on my wife. Their family even still stays in touch with a lot of these people. They've gone many different directions. It just really had an impact on my wife. And so when we got married, she said that she would love to do foster care at some point. That was not really on my radar, even though my dad was adopted, not to the foster system. So when we moved out to South Carolina, I went to Clemson for my PhD. We just went through the process. This was in late 2014. And then by the time 2015 came around, this was my first year of the program. We got our first placement, which happened to be these 3 kids. They were all 3 siblings from like an area. And it was crazy, man. I mean, obviously you can't fully prepare yourself and anticipate or predict everything. I mean, and in my opinion, actually, these types of experiences are really important for people. This is actually one of the reasons, in my opinion, why people's personalities stunt over time, is because they stop going through such intense experiences. When we took on these 3 kids, like, just as an example, I probably thought I was a really patient and nice guy before I had that experience. But when you put me in that, but I think that people's real attributes are rarely put under fire, rarely put in those situations. And so anyways, the behavioral issues, everything about it was totally nuts. And for about the first year, I just didn't really want to go home. I stayed at school. I'd come home. My wife had bags under her eyes. The house was a mess. It was intense, but obviously there was lots of amazing moments throughout that. We were driven by purpose, not by current preference. It's easy to make decisions based on current preferences, but when you're driven by purpose and bigger aims, then you make decisions that go beyond your current happiness or sadness. And over time, I began to, choose to invest myself deeper into these. One of the decisions my wife and I made actually near the beginning, knowing that these kids had been like heavily neglected. Their parents were drug addicts. Actually, less than a year after we adopted our kids, their biological mom died of cancer. She had insane drugs, and stuff like that. And so we actually, we went up to the funeral. Their biological family was totally surprised to see us. They didn't expect it, but it was good for them, our kids, to have closure, and to like go to their mom's funeral and stuff. But, one of the things we decided though at the beginning was, look, these kids have been neglected their whole lives. Who knows what's going to happen in their future? But while they're with us, we want them to at least have one memory, like one touch point where they could say from their own experience that there were people that were invested in them, that were people who cared about them, so that they could have some hopeful sense of self-esteem. And so we just decided, who cares about what we experience on the back end of this? We're going to fully invest ourselves as if we're going to adopt these kids. And if they end up not being ours, we'll take that brunt of the emotional slam, and we'll let, hopefully the kids will at least know that there were some people out there that cared. And so that was kind of how we went about it from the beginning. I mean, it took me time to transition. My wife was a lot better, but that was still the mindset we went in. And it took about 3 years in the courts, and to have a lot of state attorneys who thought we were scumbags for trying to adopt these kids. But we adopted them miraculously, and then a month later we got pregnant with 2 others. Changed our lives though, and it changed me as a person. I think I'm a better person because of it. My priorities and perspectives have changed a lot. And I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago when we started this journey. So
what do you think the biggest change was?
Mostly perspective. Perspective changes what matters to you. Perspective changes what you focus on and prioritize. Like I say no to a lot of cool business opportunities and things like that all the time, because frankly, it's just not that high of a priority to me anymore. I'd rather just go home and play with my kids. Just other things as well. I mean, I like just watching them grow, believing in their ability to change, and seeing huge progress. I mean, we've had the older ones now for 5 years. Yeah, it just changes what you focus on and what you care about.
Really deep way to start this interview off, but I really appreciate you sharing that. Wow. Do you have a motto or something you tell yourself frequently that kind of revs you up?
Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. That's Neville Goddard. I like that quote from Clayton Christensen. 100% is easier than 98%. The quote, though, that's been kind of on my mind lately is this one. It says, the most successful lives are those that have the most worthwhile experiences. So that's from a guy named Sterling Sill. He said, the most successful lives are those that have the most worthwhile experiences. And I think that that's kind of a key, is seeking experiences that are powerful. Even daily experiences. Like, what's your daily experience like? What are the experiences you're seeking? There's obviously a big aspect of personality that's called openness to new experience. So I just like the idea that the most successful lives are the ones that have the most worthwhile experiences.
Interesting. Wow. I like the quote that was on your personality isn't permanent sheet, which said, anyone who isn't embarrassed. How do you say it? Alain de Botton? A Botton?
Oh, yeah. Dude, that is a freaking great quote from Alain de Botton. But Alain de Botton is a British philosopher, brilliant guy.
Says, anyone who isn't embarrassed of who they were last year probably isn't learning enough. Wow.
Why do you like that?
Oh, man. I like that because every time I learn something big that changes the way my perspective, like we were just talking about, I am embarrassed at my previous
perspectives.
Yeah, it's just so great because it's like I love it because it shows me like I never know best. I mean, there may be absolute truths that I adopt, but I don't know best in terms of a situation or the pandemic we're going through. Like, I can't. There's no way, because if I know best, the person who's at the CDC can't know best, or the person next to me who's much more qualified doesn't know best because I know best. You know what I mean? So I love that quote. Doing this podcast, for example, that's why I always share people, please do a podcast, because it's remarkable the amazing people you connect with, but also just you learn so much about yourself. If you're editing your own show, you get to hear the way you modulate and your tonality. You get to revisit conversations and actually redigest them and pick up on things you missed the first time. When there's like a year that goes by and I don't see, the biggest thing for me is, I know I'm monologuing, is when I
love it. This is great.
when I look back in a year, because I knew from like 2016 to 17-ish, I'd look back and I'd be like, man, I used to do that or think that way. And now I like look at that almost like, oh, little buddy, you'll learn one day. And I'm like, okay, what is that next year? So right now that I'm completely oblivious to, and even doing the show, the way I do the show, the way I show up, the way I talk to people, like all that stuff's changed and continues to evolve as you grow. And convicting, because if a year goes by and I'm like, oh, I feel pretty much the same, then I know something's probably could shift.
Yeah, that quote is killer. It actually highlights pretty much all the research that, not all of it, but a lot of the cool research on obviously personality development over time. You know what I mean? Personality changes over time. It's really important actually from a psychological perspective to look at your former self as a different person. You know, my guess is like, you know, so there's a really good TED Talk for your listeners if they're ever interested, 6 minutes long. 6 minutes long. It's by a Harvard psychologist named Daniel Gilbert. His talk is basically called The Psychology of Your Future Self. But what he does is he asks people, are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Most people say no. You know, if I were to ask you, do you think you're the exact same person you were 10 years ago? Chances are you'd probably say no. What would you say?
No.
Yeah. I mean, you've gone through a lot in the last 10 years and you've learned a lot, you know. What's interesting like about that Alain de Botton quote, because this book right here, Willpower Doesn't Work. This book came out about probably a little over 2 years.
Great cover, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, nice. Yeah, here's the personality one. Basically, when I actually recently reread Willpower Doesn't Work, which came out 2 years ago, but I wrote it back in 2017. And I have to say, I would not say a lot of the things I said in that book. Not that I like philosophically fully disagree with a lot of the content in that book, but just how I did it, I'm semi-embarrassed to some degree. Like I like the quote at the beginning of Personality Isn't Permanent. There's a quote that says, a painting is never finished. It simply ends in an interesting place. And that's kind of like this podcast, for example. It's never going to actually be finished, but at some point we're going to say, dude, we got to call it. And like, that's how the book is. Like, it's never finished. It's just done at some point. It just ends in an interesting place. When I go back and reread old blog posts, I'm kind of like, wow, I would never say that today. And I'm sure that future version of me is going to say the same thing about this book that I'm putting out or this conversation, just like what you said. And that's really what the research shows, is that it's really good to view your former self as a different person, and it's really good to view your future self as a different person. Your future self is not the same person as you are today. They're not going to have the same attributes, the same characteristics. They're not going to have the same perspectives. They're not going to have the same priorities, the same goals, and they're going to see things differently. That's actually healthy. And so as a result, actually, you don't want to hold your current identity so tight. You don't want to be overly definitive about your current identity, because that would actually stunt your growth. It would stunt your imagination. It would stunt your flexibility in your attempting to make big change. And that's actually one of the core reasons why personality tests that overly categorize people are problematic, is because they lead to highly definitive labels, which overemphasize the current version of yourself. And ultimately, when you have a label, you seek to defend it and you seek to confirm it. You know, so if you define yourself as a certain way on any of these tests, what you do is you try to confirm the label, actually, rather than disconfirm it. And so it's really interesting.
Is it possible, human nature deciphering, is it possible for you to completely subjectively analyze those tests and pull what you know to be true of yourself based on past behaviors and patterns that have been verified by outside parties, to subjectively go through those things like the Enneagram and say, hey, I'm not this number, but I definitely identify with some of this. Let's see what else it says. Is it possible to do that without subconsciously identifying and therefore defending that?
I think so. And I think that maybe that's, I would be interested. I would really love to hear your story about the Enneagram. But yeah, I think so. I think the only way to do that is to take the test at face value, or is to not take it at face value. Like you have to recognize somewhat distantly that this test isn't truth. It's unless it becomes your religion, which in many cases these things do. Like I actually wrote an article about like when you take these tests seriously and the label it gives you, then you've got to defend the test as well.
Dude, honestly, it's crazy. I have people, very sharp people I know who will, oh, what Myers-Briggs are you? That's like the first question after you start getting to know someone. If they're analytical, I get that question often. Occasionally, I should say, but it's probably 2 in 5 people that you come to meet. They'll be like, "Oh, are you like an IFBJ, whatever the letters are for Myers-Briggs?" To say, "Are you this or that?" For some reason, I guess it just helps us to conceptualize people or kind of build that box. Why do we want? The brain tries to make connections to keep things as simple as possible and fast as possible to conserve glucose and stuff. That said, like, what is it about the psychology of humans that we need to feel comfortable? We almost need to put a box on or around something or someone or a situation so that we can think that we understand it, even though, like you said, it never ends. Like we can never really understand. Why do we feel the need to do that?
I think this may sound weird, but over time, you actually don't need to do that with other people or even yourself. You can actually start to recognize change more. But I will tell you, the reason people like to do it is because it's identity. And I will say identity is actually far more important than personality. Identity is how you define yourself. Personality is how you consistently show up. But these tests give people an identity. They give you a way to describe yourself. And identity is often based on the story you tell about yourself. And so these tests can give you a conceptual identity. You can then say, I am a 6, I'm an INFJ. And then with that identity, you can then relate to other people and describe yourself to other people so that other people can get some degree of a picture about you that they can comprehend and understand. And so, you know, if you don't have an identity or if you don't have a very clear one, then there's a lot of confusion or ambiguity about yourself, which can create stress. And so the box that these things create relieves stress for people. And they allow you to then quickly connect with other people. In my opinion, there's much better ways to define your identity than using a score that you get on a test, which is at best something you should take with salt. And at worst, it becomes a very limiting fixed mindset that leads to a lack of flexibility and imagination on your part. But yeah, I mean, that's why people like them, is because identity is based on story. This gives you a really easy way to explain yourself to yourself and to other people. That's why people do it. One thing that these tests ignore is context. You know, you get a score and you assume that score is always true, but in various situations, you're going to be completely different to the score you get. Like we all have different roles in our lives. You have a job, you may be in various relationships, and you shouldn't show up as the same person in all of those roles. It would actually be really terrible to show up as the exact same person in every relationship or situation you're in. If I acted the same way towards you as I did towards my 7-year-old kid, that'd be pretty weird.
Well, that's the thing. Let's jump into the definition of personality from a psychological point of view. What is personality? How do you break it down for the average person? How do we understand what personality is? I've heard that to show up in every situation, being your full self. In other words, yeah, you're going to adapt. You're going to change your demeanor and, you know, you talk different. You may make silly faces with your kids or whatever, where you were not going to do that maybe in an interview. But you're still the father, the author, the writer, you know, the personality, like you're still all those things showing up. So like I had a past guest who says he runs the most successful clinic in the US for chiropractic. And he said he shows up with his patients as the father. He doesn't just show up as the doctor. He shows up as the father, the husband, coach, friend. That helps him to really be a human with his patients. So I'm curious to know, what do you mean?
That's pretty awesome, by the way. That's pretty great.
So
but in that way, he doesn't show up the exact same way. I guarantee that guy in his office. If you put him back with some old high school friends, I'm just telling you, you'd see some different attitudes and behaviors.
So explain to us what is personality.
I mean, there's so many different ways to conceptualize it. I think that the easiest way just to explain it is that it's generally, because it should be viewed as consistent. Like that's the idea, is that it's your consistent attitudes and behaviors. It's the way you consistently show up or respond to situations. That's why people often think that it's innate. That's why people think that it is who you are. But just because you're consistent for a period of time doesn't mean that you're going to be consistent for the rest of your life. But it's basically how you show up to situations and your consistent mode of being.
That makes sense. So your consistent mode of being. What are the other pervasive and destructive societal myths of personality?
I still want to hear your story at some point, man. I'm not sure. I'm not sure when it's going to. Well, yeah. So I think the big myths are that personality doesn't change. Personality is innate. It's non-flexible. It's and that because it's non-flexible. It's just who you are. It's your authentic self, and therefore you've got to discover it. You've got to discover the real you, and that's why personality tests are popular, because they can be that discovery aid. And kind of the idea is that once you've discovered yourself or aspects of yourself, then you can finally pursue goals and relationships and things like that that fit or cater to your natural tendencies, so that life's easy and not hard for you. So I think those are kind of the general views of personality. Also, that it is primarily based on your past. And so, if you want to
are these myths? Are you sharing like
these are all myths? These are all popular views of personality that are frankly incorrect and very limiting. Yeah, none of them fit with the science, but also none of them fit with anyone who proactively seeks a powerful, meaningful life. They're very passive ways of looking at personality, and generally, they do lead to repetitive behavior. Like if you think that your personality is based in the past, then you're going to just seek to try to understand your past rather than try to reframe it, try to reshape your meaning of it, rather than trying to change how you approach things. You may use the past as justification for current behaviors. All of those concepts that I've just described are debunked by science. Like, there's research that shows your personality will fundamentally change over your lifetime, whether you do nothing about it. Like, you will not be the same person at a teenager as you will be in your 70s. Like, your personality will be totally different. But even on a shorter span, your personality will change whether you try to or not. And obviously, if you're seeking change, and if you see your life as meaningful, meaning you've got a sense of purpose for your life, you can make a pretty bold changes. And also, your personality is different from situation to situation, even if you don't think it is. Even our chiropractor friend who brings his whole self to his clinic, he's not the same person in every situation, even when he does bring his full self to those situations.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
In psychology, we talk about how context matters more than content. The context brings out different things. So like he's got a different purpose. It would be weird, to be honest with you, if he acted the same in every situation. Like when he's a chiropractor, he has a very specific purpose in mind. He's really, yes, of course he's bringing his full self, but he's really trying to help these people change. He's being a professional. When he's at a funeral, he may be bringing his full self, but the purpose would be totally different. He may be seeking to connect or to support in a different way, or just simply to learn. If he's reading a book, he may be bringing his full self, but he may be trying to learn something. When he's out in a baseball game with his kid, he may be bringing, and so yes, we could, and so the outward reflection of all that would actually look very different. And personality, as weird as it sounds, is generally based on outward reflection. It's based on how you show up. Identity is based on internal description. He may describe himself the same way in all those situations, but externally he would show up very differently in all of them.
There we go. Okay. I understand that. This is well said. The last part, I got it when you said that. Why is it important to understand your former, current, and future selves are totally different people? Why is that important?
This goes back to the Alain de Botton quote. First off, you've already admitted to me that you don't think you're the same person you were 10 years ago.
2 years ago, too.
You know what I mean? There's aspects of your former self you just don't identify with anymore. You don't have the same goals, maybe the same friends. You see the world a little bit differently. I'm not saying you're embarrassed by your former self, but you're not the same guy. Like if the current version of you was put back into former situations, you would probably respond to them differently.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good thing.
For anyone listening, I'm not going to say anything good or bad about him, but Tom Bilyeu has an amazing, well put together podcast. Him and his wife, Lisa, actually started Quest Nutrition and some other things. Amazing story. Something he said that I appreciated was basically the only stance you can take for the long term is to just always be a student, because we're very harsh on ourselves. Or, typically people, we kind of judge ourselves harshly, at least high performers. And he said that by being a student, there's not really any room for hate, because you already are saying, I don't know the answer. I'm a student. Like, you're already approaching so much of life with the open ears and a curiosity. So you're not walking around. In other words, if there are certain areas and aspects of your life that, or the world, frankly, that you approach as a student, to me, that's like the only stance you can really take to not be embarrassed of your past self. Have you ever thought of that? Because for me, one of the most embarrassing things is when I spoke so matter-of-factly when I was 22 about something that annoyed me. And I look back and I'm like, that isn't really the way anyone's going to respond well to that delivery.
I think the way you're saying is brilliant. I think what you're saying really makes sense. And this is actually why you would actually, so like there's a quote from Stephen Covey. He said, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are.
Oh, wow.
The same is true actually of our past. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are right now. So your view of the past actually changes as you change.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. It sounds like you had a thought.
I did. Yeah. That quote's amazing too. Just because of the conversation and the thoughts that it's sparking, where it says, would you repeat that quote, please?
So the Covey version is, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And then my version of it was, it's also about the past. We don't see the past as it is, we see the past as we are. So like the past, your view of the past always changes based on kind of like some things you used to think were funny, for example, are no longer funny, or some things you thought definitively you're no longer sure about, What was your thoughts though? What were the ideas coming to your mind?
That is the reason I do this podcast, to be honest, is, I love acting as a conduit for the audience that I have, but I like the opportunity to connect with such remarkable people who've done good work, kind of understand that truth, where I don't ever there's certain things that I believe my identity is defined already. However, I would be curious to hear how you define identity and personality and how they intermingle. That said, I still believe that like my personality is changing all the time, right? It's actually something. That quote is so powerful to me, because when you look at it like, okay, so you see the world as you are. So again, going back to that idea that you can't know best in every area, you can't. And so to take that stance, or to believe that you do know best, which is human nature. I think most people actually go through life like they always want to like throw a fact at you, or like slam something down your throat about something that they know better than you, to almost just to show that they're worthy of that conversation, versus even who cares about if the fact's relevant or not. It doesn't even seem that 90% of conversations I have outside of this podcast, I'm not saying anything against people I talk to, but it's just like people on the street, it's like you want to talk to them, and it's so rare that you get a question. It's just, oh, well, Trump this, or, oh, well, this is that. This is why it's the coronavirus. And it's like, you're never going to learn anything. You're calcified in your thinking. What I find is any benefits to my life have really come from approaching things in a malleable sense of, all right, yeah, you have to have a solid foundation you're coming from. And then like personality wise, so what I'm saying is, to create opportunities, I found that quote rings true. There are so many more opportunities too, that I'm always saying to myself, I try to remember, what else am I missing? What am I missing that I'm not seeing, and that I can learn to see by the way I am today? So that kind
That's
of like,
big.
That's
what else huge.
What else can I do? What else can I do? What else can I do? And then also like, what am I not seeing? Like, I understand that I'm going to maybe be embarrassed of my present day self 10 years from now, or maybe I'll be proud of my future self. That's a healthy ambition I strive for. Be proud of my past self in the future.
I love what you're saying. I mean, there's a lot of thoughts that come to my mind as well as your. What
you got?
The last thought you said is there's so many things that you're currently want to see, and also the idea of owning that the current version of you doesn't have all the answers. I think that those are two brilliant thoughts. This then goes back to identity. So there's a really good. Have you ever heard of Paul Graham by chance?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he's like a famous venture capitalist, very big in I think he's big in like the San Francisco world, but he's got a really good little essay that he wrote. It's called "Keep Your Identity Small." And the idea behind this is that when you overly have an aspect of your identity, so for example, politics or something, like you should have political views, but if you, let's just say Republican or Democrat, when you make that such a strong version of your identity, what it does is it stops you from having a conversation as you and I are describing, where you're actually a learner. When you have a strong sense of identity or a label, you then seek to defend it. And you can't have a healthy, constructive conversation on it, because any attack against the label is attack against you. And
I would disagree, man, because I think you can absolutely have a healthy conversation even if you do have a strong identity.
Well, you can. Well, yeah. I mean, I'll continue forward, but you go ahead and finish this thought.
No, that was my thought.
Okay. Well, tell me what you think as I continue forward. Because I agree that, I mean, I have a strong identity in many areas of my life, religious, spirit, however, a big challenge, and it goes back to what you were saying about what you don't see. So there's a lot of research from Ellen Langer at Harvard. Basically, she studied mindfulness, awareness, seeing things either you didn't see before or that other people can't see. And when you overly assume such a strong label or perspective, and by the way, your identity is not just who you are today, but what you and I have both agreed on is that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. Or at least that's something we can play with. Maybe in the past you saw various things differently, and in the future you're going to see things differently. I think you and I as learners would hope that we see things a little differently in the future. I hope I see things differently in the future. One problem with overly assuming a label to some degree is that you become mindless of all the times when the label actually isn't true about yourself. So Ellen Langer has spent a lot of time studying this. And when people think that they're depressed,
can you say that again?
So when you overly assume a label, you become mindless to all of the times when the label is not true, even though it is actually occurring. So like as an example, if you identified yourself very strongly as someone who's depressed, what's going to happen is you're not going to see all the times throughout a given day when you're actually not depressed. You're actually feeling quite good. Labels create tunnel vision. In psychology, we call it selective attention. We see the world selectively. We see the world as we are, not as it is. When you buy a new car, you start to see that car on the road everywhere, right? Have you had that experience?
Yeah. I love
but you don't see the 500 other cars on the road because you see the car that makes sense to you. You see the car that's relevant. That's what labels do. You see the behavior that's relevant and you ignore all the behavior that's not. And so there's many times when you're actually acting contrary to the label, but you're not going to see it because you're only paying attention. And so that can obviously lead you to being mindless. But kind of to your other point, it stops you from seeing change in other people. As an example, as a parent of a 12-year-old boy who, let's just say he's pretty rambunctious and often wants to get out of his work. That's a trigger for me. That's what I notice. What I sometimes don't notice is when he's being so freaking great in his schoolwork, because that's something I maybe just take for granted. And so there was an occasion not too long ago where I was kind of getting upset at him because I was like, dude, you're always trying to get out of your work. And my wife was amazing and she corrected me. And she said, don't talk to him like that. It's not true that he's always trying to get out of his work. Look at how great he was doing this morning and look at how awesome he's been doing. And so we can become very mindless and focused through we can have tunnel vision. And it's good to have, obviously, people to correct that, but it's also good to recognize growth and change when it's occurring, both in ourselves and others.
Just kind of letting that resonate for a minute.
Just let it sit.
It sounds like you have an amazing family, first of all.
My wife's pretty awesome, dude. She's definitely the stable force, 100%. I mean, we would, you know what I mean? I pursue big, interesting goals, but it wouldn't be possible to have 5 kids and to have a stable life outside of that without her. She is, and I think that when you get married, you're thinking about your future self. You're thinking about your future situations. You're thinking about characteristics or abilities that you don't currently have that you want. So from my perspective, just as one thought, and I mentioned in the book, getting married for personality is actually, it's seemingly a good way to do things. But if you're getting married for personality alone, the most interesting things lose their novelty over time. And also, if it's just about personality, not purpose, then it may be just based on what's pleasurable for your current self, not what's meaningful for your future self. And so it's actually more interesting from my perspective to be with someone who, through the relationship, you both transform. It's more of a transformational relationship rather than a transactional one.
That's pretty neat. I had like 3 amazing thoughts. They all slipped when you started talking about marriage and stuff.
Sorry, dude.
No,
Took you
it's
the wrong
cool.
way.
It's selective attention for my brain because I need a spouse. No, I'm just kidding. Is that also known as the reticular activating system? Is that a real thing in psychology? Or
That's
is that
kind
like,
of that's
is that
like
metaphysical or is that real?
reticular activating system is kind of a similar way of describing selective attention. Yeah, and and like self-help world, yeah, that's kind of how you train yourself to like. That's why you would do affirmations and things like that, so you can start to train your selective attention, so that you can start to notice the opportunities or situations that you're looking for. You could also stop noticing the things that you want to change. Yeah, it's just about training your tunnel vision, man. Training the way you see the world.
Got it. Okay. So I'm really curious to know, you mentioned that selective attention and how it's harmful perhaps to, it can be very harmful to speak something over someone like you were mentioning with your son there. Like you always, instead of that, what is a better thing that you could say to, like in your situation or for a parent out there, to their child in that moment to perhaps direct them in a healthier path to get focused or motivate them in a healthy manner? Like what would have been in your opinion, a better way of saying that to your son?
A million better ways. But I think what I wish I would have done and what I could hopefully do better in the future is just grab him, not like physically, but just like, just say, dude, what's going on? How can I help you? Like, what are you trying to do right now? Just literally understanding, understanding creates empathy. You know what I mean? And just understanding where he's at and try to figure out how we can help him get back on track. Why is he trying to escape the situation? And how can I help him achieve his goal? And how can I support him better? Rather than just like literally throwing darts at him. Like, you're always this way, you're a bad person. It's like, dude, what's going on? How can I help you? How can I help you accomplish this goal so that you can move forward with whatever you're trying to accomplish? Just rather than making it, accusatory and talking about his characteristics, just trying to understand his situation would be better. One last thought I just wanted to share. I just feel like I need to close this loop because you were talking so passionately about being a student. The reason I brought up Paul Graham, whether we agree or not on his concept, the key idea of that concept is that you actually want to hold your current identity a little bit more loosely. If you're overly definitive about your present identity, then what you're doing is you're saying that I know all the answers about myself. I know I am an introvert, as an example. Like, that is a very bold statement. It's very conclusive. And when you do that, what that does is it shatters imagination for a future version of yourself that's not an introvert. And it's good from a decision-making standpoint to view your future self as a different person. It's good from an achievement standpoint to define who your future self is and then to seek to become that. So in my opinion, your personality should be based on your goals. It should be based on the person you're striving to be. Your goals should not be based on your current self-definition. So if you're calling yourself an introvert, then maybe, as a way to confirm that to yourself in the world or to justify it, you would set goals that would continually confirm that element of yourself. In my perspective, it's more powerful to choose a future self that is where you genuinely want to be. That would be a stretch, which would require growth and development, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of support that would force you to change out of your comfort zone, out of your current way of doing things. I think it's better to be driven by purpose rather than your current personality, in other words.
So there's people listening who are saying, well, I agree with that. I push myself out of my comfort zone. I see the value in that, but I am an introvert. What do you say to that?
I'm saying you don't have to be. I'm saying you're not always an introvert. That's a statement that's actually not factual. Going back to the idea that labels create tunnel vision, there are probably now whether you want to be an introvert is a different question. Now, if you define yourself an introvert and if you just genuinely want to be that person, that's fine. I'm not going to ask you to change. I'm not telling you to change. I'm just telling you don't have to be that person. And actually, throughout a given day, you probably display many non-extroverted or non-introverted behaviors. I'm not saying being an introvert or being So one of the kind of more scientific ways of looking at personality is called the Big Five. It breaks personality into 5 factors. It's not categorical types. You're not going to be, actually, it would be really strange to actually call yourself an introvert from this perspective, because none of us are actually one or the other. We're on more of a spectrum. I may be more introverted than you, but I'm not actually an introvert. I actually am just a human being who displays different behaviors. But yeah, I mean, it's really, here's the thought, is that the goals we set, I mean, one of the things I've said over and over in this conversation is that your goals should predict who you are. The question is, where do your goals come from? Why did you decide to do a podcast? You know what I mean? Like, why did you choose the goals that you have? Because the goals you pursue are the things actually shaping how you see yourself. An introvert or someone who overly defines themselves that way probably doesn't have very many social goals. They probably don't want to be a politician. Wow. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying, why are you pursuing what you're pursuing? There's reasons why you've decided that this is the person you're going to be. And the question is that the best decision you could have made? And if you were exposed to different things, or if you had a different level of confidence, or if you had a different level of support, would you choose something else? Would you choose to be something more, doing something more, if you thought you could, or if you knew of better options? As an example, my 3 foster kids, they didn't have a lot of understanding of what was possible or available to them, because they lived in the middle of nowhere. Their parents were on drugs, and they were in front of the TV all day. They were not exposed to enough to even set goals that are now available to them, because they had no clue. You put them in a new environment with a new context, a new perspective, and give them new experiences. All of a sudden they're exposed to new things, so they can actually conceptualize different goals. You give them confidence building experiences, and they'll believe they can do more. So they'll try harder things and stop defining themselves by the past. And so my invitation for people is, why are you defining yourself so strongly? And why have you chosen this to be the thing that you must have in your future? Is it possible that you could expose yourself to better things, or maybe build the confidence to pursue something more meaningful or better?
I like how you mentioned that the goals you're pursuing shape who you become.
They shape your identity as well. They shape how you see yourself today, but they do shape who you become 100%. But the things you're pursuing shape your current view of yourself, your identity.
So how do you define identity?
I mean, it's really just your self-concept. It's how you see yourself. It's the story you're telling of yourself. It's how you view yourself. So obviously an aspect of your identity is likely that you're a podcaster, and that view of yourself, it might not be. Maybe it's not. You shake your head no. Maybe it's not. I would be surprised if it wasn't, and I don't know why it wouldn't be.
No, I'm not trying to be disagreeable. I'm going on with the train of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I would be surprised if it's not, given that you engage in podcasting. Something that your behavior signal. We call it self-signaling in psychology, but your behavior also signals back to you the type of person you think you are. So if you podcast, you probably start to say, well, maybe I'm the type of person that does that. If I wake up early in the morning, maybe I'm the type of person that does that. If I go to church, maybe I'm the type of person that does that. I mean, behavior signals back identity, but identity is also the story you tell about yourself. Obviously, it's fluid. Although for a lot of people, the story is overly stable. That's actually one of the reasons why personality gets stunted, is because people tell the same definitive story about themselves that they've been telling for a lot of years. And so the story becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy to many degrees.
Yeah.
So identity is a thing that actually drives and should drive personality. Identity is something that you can decide. You can define yourself a different way. But your self-concept guides your behavior, and your behavior over time shapes your personality.
What are the most effective and science-based ways for making radical change in your life? So you mentioned the Big Five personality test. You like that one?
Yeah, it's not a test really. You actually can get tested on it, yes. But I mean, it's the most scientifically studied theory of personality. So yeah, definitely. Although even that, every theory of personality has so many flaws, man. None of it's perfect. The Enneagram is far from a perfect idea. And so even the best scientifically studied views of personality are incredibly flawed. There's research, for example, studying the Big Five, and the Big Five are just different factors. One's introversion or extroversion, one's openness to new experience, one's conscientiousness, one's agreeableness, and the other one is neuroticism. These are just different characteristics, and we're all on the board on them. But they've studied these concepts. They've studied the big five in other countries, and it just doesn't work because other countries, like in other cultures, they just don't view personality the same way. And so that model of personality in some cultures just doesn't work.
Would you say like the key behind fostering a healthy personality? Yeah. What are some of the keys behind that?
I think a big one kind of goes to what you said, being a learner, setting goals, becoming more flexible.
Okay.
One of the things that we haven't talked about, obviously, and it's fine if we don't, but unresolved trauma leads you to being emotionally rigid. You know what I mean? You got to ask yourself, why did you start defining yourself as an introvert, or however you define yourself? Why did you start defining yourself as someone who's not good at math? Like whatever the limiting mindsets are, there was probably an experience in the past that was emotionally painful that led to what we call a cognitive commitment. There was some experience that was emotionally painful that led to a self-concept. And you've then defined yourself that way and became non-flexible and non-imaginative. So there's a really good book called,
go
ahead.
Why is that negative though? That is a negative impact on your personality and development, right? But why?
I would say it doesn't have to be negative, but it is a fixed mindset. And
that so can limit your future.
It does limit your future. If you have a fixed mindset about anything, it means you don't view a future in that area. Like if you don't view yourself as someone who can do math because you had a negative experience, then so there's a really good book, and for anyone who wants to learn more about trauma, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. It's the definitive book on trauma at this time. It's by a guy named Bessel van der Kolk, but what he talked about is trauma unresolved can shatter your flexibility and it shatters your imagination. And so like those two things are actually relevant to having what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset, which is the belief you can actually change and develop in various areas. If you don't believe you can change or develop in various areas, then you have no imagination in those areas. You don't see a future in those areas. Therefore, you're not flexible to even trying. There would be no meaning to doing it. I don't know if you've ever read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Amazing book.
It's huge. It's so important. But one of the things he talks about is that when the people in the concentration camps lost a sense of purpose or future, the present became meaningless. The present became unbearable and they died. And so once you lose that faith, that hope, or that imagination that something could be different or better, then the present loses its meaning. It becomes unbearable. And that's really what trauma does. It's like if you don't believe you can do math, attempting to do so would be unbearable. Why would you even try? You've got no purpose, no imagination, no flexibility, no future in that area. That's called a fixed mindset. And so any area where you've overly defined yourselves as I can't do this, you've got no future in that area. It's just a lack of confidence, but it's also an unresolved meaning from some painful experience in the past. You can change the meaning though, just like you can change memory. You can change the meaning of any experience. I grew up in a terrible situation as an example. I had, at age 11, my father became a drug addict, and was an extreme drug addict through all my junior high and high school years. Of course, the 11-year-old version of me and even teenage version of me was creating meaning. I was defining my worldview and my experience based on what was happening. The 32-year-old version of me should have a different view of it. I should be able to make different meanings from those experiences so that I'm not defined the same way. And in my opinion, the best way to view the past is that everything happened for you, not to you. If it still happened to you, then you're still the victim of it. If it happened for you, then you can use it. Like if I hadn't gone through those experiences, I actually wouldn't have as close of a relationship with my dad as I have now. He's no longer a drug addict, and we have an incredibly close relationship, and I've watched him change his life. But also, if I hadn't gone through those experiences, I probably wouldn't have married my wife. What attracted us to each other in a lot of ways is that she had gone through a lot of crazy things too. She had been in an incredibly abusive marriage before she got married to me. And so like there were aspects of our former challenges that we had overcome that attracted us to each other. We both had watched ourselves overcome a lot. Therefore, we believed we could do a lot, which led us to things like adopting 3 kids. So if I hadn't had those experiences and viewed them as they happened for me, they're beneficial. They actually allow me to do more, not less. Then that allows you to have a bigger future because of challenging former experiences versus having a smaller future because of challenging unresolved experiences.
It's well said, man. This is probably, I knew this was going to be an amazing interview, man. People, wait, like, I think people love talking about this stuff too. I just do, because it's directly affects our everyday reality. Um, Man, and also as something else that I'm sure you've thought about this before, but it just stuck out to me was you can, I mean, at some point, if you haven't already, I think you're going to have a lot more ground to work with your children, because of your background and their background,
Yeah.
and I think that's so, that's just powerful because, looking at, I don't know anything about fostering or the system at all personally. I mean, except of like the large concept of what it is at a high level. That said, I mean, the main things that stick out to me are like, oh, it's going to be so difficult because you won't be able to relate. And so in your situation, it's like that I think is going to be such an integral part. And how amazing is it, the fact that your father's story is now essentially, redeemed? Like, sounds like he's turned things around, like you said, and is a completely different person. And that you can see that in your life, to know him through that is so amazing, But that kind of, what you were sharing, I think all that sparked from, or you mentioned the book by Bessel, but you also mentioned the book by
Frankel.
Yeah. And that one, what can people do? What stuck out to me was, if somebody's listening right now and they maybe deal with and have experiences with depression, and they just say to themselves, like, almost the Eeyore syndrome of, well, it's never going to change. These people hate me, or I'm this or that. First and foremost, can you address the pride in those, if there is any, in that identity loop or selective attention? And can you then address how to combat that and overcome it with a more healthy perspective to hopefully get a better result and more enjoyable existence, if for someone dealing with maybe depression or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll say that I've definitely dealt with a lot of depression in my life. A lot of depression during my teenage years when, my family situation was ridiculous, and a lot of depression even since being married. When I first got married, as much as I love my wife, like, I spent a lot of the first year depressed, and it wasn't because of her exactly, but just my dealing with the situation. And even right after I launched Willpower Doesn't Work, it failed in many ways. And as weird as that sounds, I went through about a 4 or 5 month depression in 2018. I also almost got kicked out of my PhD program. We also adopted 3 kids and had twins and moved in 1 year. And that, there's actually a really good stress scale that talks about how, like, you can.
Were you even on it? But
yeah, this stress scale is cool. I'll actually send you a link and you can share it in the notes if you want. But it lists life events and it gives you a score. So like the death of a spouse is like probably the hardest. They give you a score of like 100. Moving is like probably like a 40. Losing a job is like, but you add it up, and if you have anything over like a 300, like your chances of becoming like physically ill because of the sickness are really bad. And I think I was at like a 550 or something like that. And so like as a result, I was so stressed, I was depressed. I also was just. But anyways, with all that said, I think it's what your question was really important. Like, I think that when someone's so definitive about their current, especially with a label, I actually think in many ways it can be ego. Like because it requires that you do nothing about it. If you say I'm an ENTJ or whatever, then you're justified in all of your behavior. There's no reason to change it. It's almost like look, this is who I am. And like, this, what you see is what you get. And like, don't expect anything otherwise. Like, this is how you work with me. This is how you, this is how you relate to me. That's actually how Myers and Briggs viewed people, is that they can't change. Everyone's just got hardwired predispositions. And rather than you making adjustments to yourself to be a better human being, the world around you should cater to your dispositions. That's how Myers-Briggs viewed people. Myers and Briggs. Anyways, for the person who's, going through their deep, dark hole, which a lot of us will at various times, I think Frankel's story is really good. The present becomes unbearable. Suffering becomes unbearable if you don't have a meaning for it. And if you don't have a meaning for it, that means you don't have a purpose. And if you don't have a purpose, it means you don't have a clear future that you're striving for. having a clear future that you're striving for, and which gives meaning to the present, allows it to be endurable. There's something else that Frankl said, and even that Mr. Rogers said, and it's so good that I feel like I should actually read it. So let me just pull this up real quick, because I don't want to I don't want to downplay it. I can pull it up in about 20 seconds.
This is Mr. Rogers we're talking about.
Our boy, Mr. Rogers. You can't really, you don't want to let him down.
You don't want to paraphrase that.
No, but also Frankl. So here's what Viktor Frankl's. Well, so now I'm going to give 3 quotes. Yeah. One is from Dan Sullivan. He said, and he's the founder of Strategic Coach. He said, "All progress starts by telling the truth." So that's one. I'm going to share 2 more quotes, and I think it'll all come together. The second one is from Frankl. Frankl says, "Emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it." So I'll say that one more time. Emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as we form a clear and precise picture of it. All right. Now I'll share the Mr. Rogers one, and I'll pull this together. So Mr. Rogers says, "Anything that is human is mentionable. Anything that is mentionable can become more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone." So with all of this said, whatever the person who's, I wouldn't call you depressed, I would say the person who's kind of struggling in some form or fashion with feeling joy or with finding purpose or meaning in your life, or maybe losing hope. Really, the first area you've got to go is probably either your journal or even to someone important, someone you can talk to. And you need to be very open about what you're feeling. All progress starts by telling the truth, and emotion ceases to be suffering when you form a clear picture of it. Journaling is a really great area, actually, for reframing and for getting emotionally regulated, emotionally clear. And so just writing about what you're feeling, and even talking about it to someone you feel safe to talk about it with, getting it out of you is honestly enough to just start to think about it differently. That's why I said when you form a clear and precise picture of it, it stops being suffering. The goal is actually, whatever you're experiencing, the goal is for it to stop being suffering. Depression is a form of suffering. There's also a lot said that depression comes from passivity, that if you're being overly passive, chances are you're going to feel a little depressed. And if you're depressed and you're remaining passive, you're going to stay depressed. You've got to actually go and be proactive to create what are called peak experiences, which open you up. But I love the Rogers. Anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can become more manageable. When you start talking about it and opening up, you can then start doing something about it. If it's still in your head or it's still just absorbing your system, then you're just being bloated by it. And so I think that just talking about it. Also, I find that there's a lot of strength, not only talking about what you're dealing with emotionally, and also writing about it regularly, which allows you to then come up with plans and do something about it, but also telling people about your dreams, telling people about your goals, telling people about what you want to accomplish. That's kind of framing out your future self and being a little bit more authentic and honest about the person you want to be versus overly defining the person that you currently are. When you tell people about who you want to be and you hear yourself talking about it, you start to believe it a little bit more. I know that someone's ready to overcome an addiction, or at least they're moving in the right direction. First off, when they can admit that they've been struggling so there's a really good quote around all of this, and it's that you're as sick as your secrets. That's actually an Alcoholics Anonymous concept, that you're only as sick as your secrets. And so usually with trauma or addiction or things like that, or even depression, if you're keeping it secret, if you're holding it in, it's going to lead to really unhealthy coping mechanisms, internal sickness. And so obviously you want to not have a lot of secrets. You want to be open about what you're dealing with, open about what you're feeling, and also open about what you want. And so for someone who's dealing with addiction, it's like, yeah, this is where I've been. It's not where I want to be anymore, and I need help. That's why willpower is the worst way to try to overcome an addiction, is because, what they say is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's human connection. It's seeking help. And also, this is why mentorship is so powerful. If you've got big goals, is you're seeking help towards your future self. So it's about getting out of yourself and connecting with other people and getting support emotionally and also towards your goals.
And that's big. That's really big. Thanks for sharing that. That was really good. Wow. So many different avenues from that. One of the things I like is, you know, you got to be courageous to share that with somebody you trust, even if you have somebody that, you know, you trust. You got to be courageous about that. And do you have any insight into one of the things that I've began developing is a callus socially over the last year, especially as I realized that, you know, nobody owes me anything, but at the same time, it's nice to like have some supportive friends and family who want to hear what your dreams are and your goals. But I found that, you know, even those closest to you, and, you know, not that this is relevant to my life, but many times, like, you may expect, oh, it's my great grandpappy or my parents or anybody really. You may be, oh, they're just going to be so supportive and happy for me, but they, you know, at some point we're all humans, and so, you know, you may actually spark envy in them by sharing your goals and dreams with them, and they see your progress, and you have to be aware of the human nature behind all that. I'm not saying this to scare people from sharing, and this is more so on the avenue, completely on the avenue of, you know, goals and dreams, not of, you know, not the other one where we're trying to build human connection to fight addiction. That's talking
or
separate.
overcome depression, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It sounds like I'm saying keep secrets. That what I'm asking you is for insight and almost help in the category of, for me, like I said, I've been developing a callus. I don't trust anyone I meet. I extend trust, and then if they give me three like multiple reasons to show that I can't trust them, I withdraw it and, you know, treat them respectfully, but no longer have, you know, much trust in between there. I think that's healthier than going around cynical, like respect is earned and trust is earned. I'm like, then you're going to be pretty lonely in my mind, because yeah, it is earned over time and it does develop and get bigger. But if your approach to life is, you know, I actually really kind of resent that belief, because it's like, who are you to say that to everyone else? Because then if everyone thought that way, you know, where would it stop? No one would talk to anyone. If you believe that, like, you know, respect is earned. I think trust is something. I've been listening to a leadership podcast, and he talked about the concept of extending trust within your organization. Initially, as the leader, you have to take that step and extend trust. You know, not say trust is earned, but extend it. And then, you know, if it is received and fostered, great. But if not, then that's different. So as you can see, I'm going through a lot of this, kind of trying to make solid decisions about what to believe in this area. In terms of, one of the reasons I go to maybe an event or do this podcast is to connect with people like yourself who, you know, it's a fairly subjective conversation, but it's also many times fosters great friendships as well, and mentorships where, you know, you can speak clearly and openly about where you want to go in life and not feel like the person is going to have any bias, or they just want to see you do well, if they even care, you know. Not that anyone should. But I guess what I'm asking for is, you know, what do you think about that as it pertains to as it pertains to developing personality and moving in a healthier direction in life? What do you think about? Man, I'm trying to.
I got it. Do you care if I share? I think,
yeah,
I
mean,
you shared so many brilliant thoughts, really.
If
let me go ahead and start, and you can pull in and correct my direction if I'm going wrong way. I mean, you were mentioning callous. You were mentioning, to some degree, getting the wrong information. You were also mentioning projecting trust initially. My thoughts on the matter, and I agree with you 100%, that it takes extreme courage. All of this takes courage. This is why it would go against your current personality. To stay in your current persona doesn't require that much courage. To be consistent with who you've always been, or to look towards your past, doesn't require that much courage. To move towards the future and to kind of step out of your typical way of doing things and embracing uncertainty, that's kind of where choices come in. Yeah, that takes courage. I mean, courage is the doorway to change. I would actually point people to the book Letting Go by David Hawkins. Freaking amazing book. But courage is always the doorway to change. That's why all progress starts by telling the truth. It takes courage to face and change the past. It takes courage to open up and embrace the future. So if you don't want to deal with courage, then, you know, you're very limited in your options. Let's just say that. But as far as telling people about who you want to be and about developing that callus, I think it's like I love the poem. Good timber does not grow with ease. The stronger wind, the stronger trees, the further sky, the greater length, the more the storm, the more the strength. Like I like the idea of having deep roots and like intense bark, I guess you could say that.
Yeah.
And by the way,
yeah.
I gotta leave in a sec, but but I like the idea of being hardened, but I also like the idea of being very soft. And I think that too much we maybe go one way or the other, like flexible versus hardened. I think I prefer flexibility personally, although you need to have a tough skin. But in my opinion, just as an example, you become a lot more authentic in your relationships if you're open and honest about who you want to be. And if you're they say that the number one regret that people have on their deathbed is that they didn't be the person they wanted to be. They didn't have the courage to be who they wanted to be. Instead, they lived up to the expectations of those around them. Obviously, one of the biggest things predicting personality is your peer group and the roles that you're in and the situations that you're in. And if you're staying in the same situations and in the same peer group, you're probably playing the same persona, probably stuck in roles and identities, versus being honest and saying, look, this is who I've been, but this is really where I want to go. And, if you don't support that, that's all right. Like, I understand that might impact you in some way or another, but this is the way I've got to go. Like, otherwise I'm not really being genuine with myself. And so I think that if you're not willing to tell people about who you're striving to be, you're actually living a lie in the relationship anyways. But also it takes bold courage to tell people where you want to go. It also aligns your environment so people who will support you can support you in the correct way. And also hearing yourself say where you want to go clarifies your identity, because now you're hearing yourself say the person you want to become, which makes it even more easy to start acting in accordance. So your behavior can start being consistent with your future self versus staying consistent with either your environment or your former self. So I think it's incredibly important to develop the confidence and the courage to eventually just get to the point where you own the person you really want to be without shame and without judgment towards anyone, how they respond.
Man, Dr. Ben Hardy on the show. Man,
just hanging out with you, man. Just hanging out with you. That's all.
We've had a lot of deep conversation on this episode. Okay, the park bench paradigm. If you could go back in time to a dark chapter in your 20s, you saw your younger self, Ben, sitting on a bench overlooking a body of water, maybe it's an ocean or a lake. You're at a park, you're sitting on a bench, and your present day, you can go up to him, put your arm around your own shoulder, and say anything. What would you say and why?
Yeah, I love this. Yeah, I think just everything's going to be okay. You're going to be all right. You're okay. I think that's important for everyone to hear, is that you're okay. Regardless of what's occurred in your life or that's happened in the past, you're actually a normal, great person, and that your future has amazing potential and that you can have it, and that you should start going for it and start getting whatever encouragement or support or help you need. But we all need that empathetic witness. We all need that supporter, and to help us feel like we're normal and that we can have a great future. And I had that. There was people in my life that came to me and assured me that I was okay and that my future could be whatever I wanted it to be when I'd kind of given up hope on it.
How can we support you after the show? We have your book launch and want everybody to grab a copy of that. And Ben, how can we support you after the show? What's the social media you're most active on?
Oh, cool. BenjaminHardy.com is my website. Obviously, that's not necessarily social media, but best way to support me is to get Personality Isn't Permanent. That's comes out in June. I think that book will change your life. It's got about 150 journal prompts, a lot of crazy good science to help you change your memory, your past, and also to redesign your future. If you go to BenjaminHardy.com, there's 3 free online courses that I give to people who buy the book. Deeper dive into the book, deeper dive into journaling strategies, and also if anyone's interested in blogging, I give away lots of
that's huge, man.
My blogging strategies.
Medium is a really cool platform. Man, thank you so much for coming on the show, spending some time with us. Look forward to staying in touch. This was really good. I can see an encore uproar right now in the future.
Dude, if you want to do an encore, let's do it, man. All I got to do is schedule it, and I'll jump on with you anytime.
Appreciate that. Hey, man. Well, thanks again, and have an awesome day.
You too, man. It was a pleasure.
Cool, guys. So we just spoke to Dr. Ben Hardy. I want to jump into some post-interview thoughts. Man, I'm not sure where he stands in different, like if he's religious or like what his spiritual beliefs are. I would be curious to get into that. Go ahead and comment down below what was your top takeaway from that conversation? I have a lot to think about after that and a lot to process. I think re-listening to this episode multiple times is going to serve me and serve you well. Go ahead and comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. Hit the like button for me, and we can help the YouTube algorithm get this episode shared to more and more people. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell notification so you can get notified every time a new interview like this is released. Man, that was a great conversation. It was really good. There were so many directions I wanted to take that, and I'm sorry if I didn't ask the question that came to your mind. I tried to ask those questions as I would think as an audience member, like what would I want to ask? And I asked a lot of questions from my point of view as well. So hopefully you got something from this interview. If you did, go ahead and comment down below, like the top quote, the top takeaway, the top concept that you're going to go ahead and work through or process or re-listen to down below in the comments. One of the things that stood out to me so strongly was the opposite of addiction is human connection. You know, that concept coming from AA, I think he said. That concept is very powerful. I have also, in a past interview, if you haven't heard, with author of Soul Care, he says secrecy begets shame. You know, having accountability partners in every area of your life is so crucial to really seeking help, because when you start taking action to seek help and to eliminate secrecy, it really does kind of open up new avenues, new doors, and new opportunities for you in your life. I can definitely attest to that. Shout out to my boy, Kerry Hokama. Kerry actually launched a new video series called Thou, Thou, on YouTube, and he's essentially following a day in the life of influencers, podcasters, authors, and he's going through a day in the life, and it almost has a comedians in cars getting coffee vibe. If you've watched that, almost like a documentary. Yeah. So it's great. Not that it's funny. There's some humorous parts, but it's a very in detailed and fun show to watch. I've actually watched it and really am excited for his next chapter. Amazing. Also appreciate that he introduced me and Dr. Ben Hardy. Appreciate you guys. Live wide open and Godspeed. See you next time. Congratulations on making it to the end of this episode. I appreciate all of your love and support, and I will see you in the next episode. As always, be generous on every occasion. There is a story for you, and live wide open.